We are now recording.
My agent will be in touch for residuals.
And when, as in the Unitarian religious meetings, but also committee meetings, we often start with a lighting of a chalice and some remarks that frame our meeting. What I thought you might do for this meeting is just to remind us all that 15 years ago, the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, they had a statement of conscience, and it goes like this: Earth is our home. We are part of this world, and its destiny is our own. Life on this planet will be gravely affected unless we embrace new practices, ethics, and values to guide our lives on a warming planet. As Unitarian Universalists, how can our faith inform our actions to remedy and mitigate global warming, climate change? We declare by this statement of conscience that we will not acquiesce to the ongoing degradation and destruction of life that human actions are leaving to our children and grandchildren. We as Unitarian Universalists are called to join with others to halt practices that fuel global warming, climate change, and to instigate sustainable alternatives and to mitigate the impending effects of global warming, climate change, with just and ethical responses. As a people of faith, we commit to renewed reverence for life and respect for the interdependent web of all existence. And then I guess
I'm an Episcopalian, but to that I'll say amen.
Thanks. And we're going to be hearing tonight from Interfaith Power and Light. And I just want to give a little background. Their vision, Interfaith Power and Light, would start in 1998, with a lot of Episcopal leadership in the beginning, but now is very interfaith and has state organizations throughout the country. Their vision is, they envision a stable climate where humans live in right and just relationship, interconnected with a healthy, thriving, natural world. To realize that vision, their mission is to inspire and mobilize peoples of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. So they're committed to doing what they did for us. And I wanted to introduce you to the two principals who are going to remind us about their findings and then answer some questions if you have them. Just let me find my notes. For some reason it didn't print out my notes. Well, I'll let them introduce themselves because I've lifted those. You want to start,
Sure.
Jim, and then Bill?
Sure. Great. Well, and first of all, thank you for gathering tonight to talk in detail about our report. It's great to see so much interest, and hopefully this will help you think through the actions that you can take based on that. My name is Jim Nail. I'm the president of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light, member of the executive committee. Been part of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light for probably 12 years or so. I also lead our solar program. So I was delighted to dig into some of the details of your solar installation. I know that's one of the questions, Phil, that you have about what to do about that going forward. So we can talk about that. I'm also, as a related but kind of side issue, I am a provisionally certified home energy rater, which the process of becoming a certified home energy rater, you study a lot of the principles of building science, which always involves a certain amount of physics and thermodynamics. And while it's focused on houses, those principles and those laws of physics and things pertain to every kind of building type. So that's kind of a new thing that I just earned earlier this year that I bring to this. I'm also a member of St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church in Dover. Probably not surprising to y'all, I also lead our Environmental Stewardship Committee. I'm also on the chair of the property committee right now. We did solar panels in 2013, so about a year or so after you all did. And we're right now looking at converting our building from mostly electric baseboard heat with a little bit of propane furnace heat in part of the building to heat pumps. So we're talking to contractors and starting to get a sense of what that project will look like. Bill, over to you.
Sure. So I'm Bill Schroeder, and I'm on the executive committee of Mass Interfaith Power and Light. I've been associated with the group for about 8 years. I'm a engineer by training. I've been retired for a little while. I lead the Mass Interfaith Power and Light ESA program. So I was the first point of contact for you folks, and helped to get you on board when you were interested, and was delighted to do that. And then I did come participate with Jim. Jim really did most of the work in the audit and wrote the report and so forth. I carried the water, but glad to help. I'm a member of South Church in Andover, Mass. It's a UCC church. And I've been involved with our, what we call a green team for a number of years. And one of the things that we did a while ago was install solar panels on the roof back in 2012. So we were the first church in town to have them. And it's worked out very well. And we've got a number of members of the congregation who have, in part due to that inspiration, installed them on their houses and places of business and so forth. So I congratulate you for doing it too, and I'm sure you've been a reference point and a beacon for a lot of people in Winchester. And currently, we're starting to talk about getting to net zero at South Church and what that will involve. And we're beginning that conversation in the church. One of our big challenges there is going to be we heat with gas, and we have an old steam heat system. Sound a little familiar, maybe. So parts of it are 70 years old, and it definitely needs to go, particularly if we want to get to net zero, which we'd really like to do. So that's going to be our next big challenge. And nice to meet you all.
Well, the standing committee authorized us this proposal to go forward early in the fall, and for $895, since we're a relatively prosperous church in terms of our budget, we got them on board, and they took a couple of months and visited us once, but asked a lot of questions of all of us, and particularly Thomas and Sue Doubler and Chuck answered a lot of those questions. And they put together a report, which I hope most of you have reviewed by now. But I asked them to kind of go over it a bit with us in a summary way, so that those of you who aren't familiar with it or read it quickly will have a good idea of what the core findings are. Is that work for you guys?
Yep, sounds good.
Good, thanks, Maggie. So, and do you want questions as we go? And our recording, are we recording, Fritzy?
Yep.
Great. So, do you want questions as we go or afterwards?
Happy to take questions along the way. The more sort of interactive and conversational this is, the better.
Okay, thank you.
All right, but I do have some slides and things, so I will put those up here. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So whoever, Phil, is that you as the host? If you can.
No, Fritzy's really the host. She'll know what to do.
Oh, she has a thumbs up. Let me try it again
I
then.
think she needs to make you co-host.
There we go.
We discussed that before you got here.
There we go. There we go. Put this into slideshow mode. Great. So we call what we do an environmental stewardship assessment rather than an energy audit. And we do that very intentionally because a typical energy audit is going to focus on, some of the things we talk about, the equipment and what fuels you use and carbon footprint and things like that. But Phil, to that statement that you read earlier, this is broader than that, and it is part of our faith to be stewards of this gift of creation that God has given us. This meeting is working out really well for Mass IPLs, the way we state our mission, which we summarize in 3 words: pray, act, and mobilize. So I'll consider that statement a prayer of how we're connecting actions about climate change to what we believe as people of faith. Most of the session today will talk about the actions that you can take. And then finally mobilize, which is about enacting legislation, regulation, government policies that will put us on a path toward a more sustainable future. The climate change has progressed to the point that as much action as we all do individuals, and as important as it is that we take action as individuals, we need that broader, societal level change to really address that. So I'm actually going to start a little bit from the mobilized side and set the context for the report on the new climate legislation that the legislature passed and Governor Baker signed in March, which sets a goal of the Commonwealth being net zero by 2050. And so our environmental stewardship assessment reports are evolving to reflect that goal and to help provide our members not just ways to lower their carbon footprint, but what is your path to achieve that net zero goal in line with both the state and now after a couple of weeks ago the climate summit that President Biden held and committed the WUS to net zero by 2050. Then I'll focus in on the big projects. There were 2 big things that I identified that are going to take significant planning, conversation, fundraising, but are really important over the long term to get to net zero. But then there are a number of things I outlined as well that you can do in the short term that will involve, I'm sure, some effort and certainly some money, but not on the same scale as those big projects. So here's a very quick summary. There's certainly a lot more detail in the bill, and some of you probably know the details better than I do. But obviously the big thing to come out of that bill is a goal of being net zero by 2050 with interim emission targets each 5 years leading up to then, 50% reduction by 2030. And this bill, as well as the 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act, uses a 1990 baseline year. So reducing 50% or net zero compared to the 1990 usage of energy in the state. A number of ways we're going to get there: renewable portfolio standard, requiring the electric utilities to increase their renewable portfolio, which means more solar and wind, a number of policies to support that, including helping lower income people access that, which has been very challenging for them up to this point. Obviously, we need a workforce with some new skills in order to do all of that. And one of the things we were particularly excited to see and supported very much was this idea of environmental justice and looking at communities and the Black and brown communities that typically have been the ones to bear the brunt of air pollution and some of these other environmental issues. SIPL was part of a coalition that worked on carbon pricing for a number of years, but definitely got behind this bill as it was taking shape, and helped shape some of these provisions, particularly the environmental justice provisions. So that was part of our mobilize. So here's where the state is right now. In 2008, the state enacted the Global Warming Solutions Act, set a goal of a 25% reduction in carbon emissions by 2020, which the state was able to achieve. And so having achieved that then this year, leading up to this year, since we were on path to do that, again, the legislature was thinking about where to go next, and that's how we got this climate bill. One of the things we often get asked is, well, gee, if these goals are based on a 1990 baseline, we don't have data going back to 1990, so what should we do? And I think this chart is really helpful, because if you see my mouse, if you go over here around 2005, it wasn't really that much different between 1990 and 2005. It goes up and down a little bit each year, but stays in a fairly narrow band. So since you had also worked with us in like 2005, and we had 2004, 2005 data, I'm going to call that your baseline. I'm going to call that the same as 1990, close enough. Certainly more important to put the effort into moving forward than trying to dig up stuff backward. But one of the top line things that I put early on in the report was the fact that you are here. You have already reduced your carbon footprint 60% compared to what it was in that 2005 report. So you're ahead of 2030 and on your way to 2050. So a lot of great work has been done there. Not only is it a reduction in carbon emissions, but along that, reduction in the actual usage of fuel when you measure it in British thermal units, which is kind of the standard unit used in this kind of thing. A number of things you've done by switching from oil to gas, improved your schedule of boiler maintenance and caught up on some things that had apparently not been tended to for a while. And your heating system, as I said to Chuck, is like probably the most complicated one I've seen. There's about 4 generations of equipment and strategies, one of which probably dating back to 1898 was having a lot of external ducts to bring in external air, which was probably great during the summer to bring in cool air when the building heated up, but not so great in the winter to bring in all that cold air. So I know those have been tended to. You've also had a dramatic reduction in your electric usage, first by an LED lighting upgrade, and then really just paying attention to these heating cables on your roof to deal with ice dams and icicles and things that form because the construction of your roof has very little insulation, and so the heat tends to melt the snow on your roof, and then as it gets to the eaves, it freezes again. And to me, that is a great example of one of the things that we talk about that's different than a typical energy audit. We do talk about behavior, which is basically paying attention to these things and not, like most of us, most of the time, walk into a room, flip on a light switch, expect the lights to be on. We walk into a room, we expect it to be comfortable. You don't really think about energy that much. And that's what our focus on behavior is about. Just paying a little bit of attention and thinking about some of these things, you can actually make some great progress. Of course, you've got your solar panels covering about 2/3 of your electric use. And you've purchased green energy, 100% renewable for the other 1/3. So great stuff. You already got the preview of that. So congratulations. Really terrific work you've done so far. So I hope you all, feel very good about that and feel that, the effort you've put into it has really accomplished a lot, because it has. Okay, oops. So a companion to the bill was this document that Governor Baker published actually at the end of 2020. This is his Decarbonization Roadmap. And if any of you followed the back and forth between the legislature and Governor Baker as the bill was being finalized, as usual, there's a lot made of the differences between what the legislature wanted and what the governor wanted. But generally, they're probably in 85 to 90% agreement. So this is a good document for those of you interested in digging a little bit deeper to see what is behind that goal and how the Baker administration thinks we're to get there. And in the report, it specifies these 5 priority areas to focus on. How do we decarbonize transportation, buildings, the energy supply, non-energy uses like agriculture, and then how do we sequester carbon for that amount that we're not able to get 100% to renewable, but then we want to offset that by sequestering carbon or having more forests to take carbon out of the atmosphere, things like that. So the one we'll focus on here, so then these key principles that apply across that is how do we transition all of these energy users away from fossil fuels and toward renewables? How do we get more efficient with our use of energy and flexible so that, one of Governor Baker's real focuses is how to do this in a way that is affordable and doesn't hurt the economy. So that's, his idea is let's have a little more flexibility so that we can, find cost-efficient ways to do things. Decarbonizing the energy supply. So the electric grid, going to low carbon energy, and the approval that the Biden administration gave to Vineyard Wind will certainly be a big boost toward that. That will be an exciting project. And then finally, carbon sequestration. So for whatever we're not able to reduce through all these other things, find ways to remove that carbon from the atmosphere, whether it's trees or whether it's a technology that extracts it and takes it out of the atmosphere. And then, of course, we're going to focus mostly here on buildings. And in the report, it notes 27% of statewide emissions come from residential and commercial buildings. Key principles and actions here are the electrification of space and water heating, which the report recognizes as something that's low risk, cost effective, a solution that is in the market now and becoming more and more common. Investing in envelope efficiency, i.e. better windows, better insulation, so less of the heat leaks out of the building as you heat it up. And to me, this was a really important statement that while, I'm seeing a lot of talk lately about things like renewable gas or biogas, and we read some about biomass plants and things like that. And I thought it was interesting and important that the Baker administration recognized that, yeah, there'll be some of that available, but there won't be enough in order to achieve the net zero goals. So for the most part, the use of gas and oil, he didn't say oil, but gas for building heat needs to decline soon, start declining soon, and decline very quickly. And the end result of this is this vision of, I think, that world that the Unitarian statement also pointed to, where the air will be cleaner and healthier for everyone in the Commonwealth. Homes will be more comfortable and more efficient with this electric heat pump heating and cooling technology. Vehicles will become electric, reducing air and noise pollution. And all of this will create, good jobs and, give people really not only, I think, a good paycheck, but I think a good purpose for the work they do. I'll pause there before we get into things on the report. Any, comments, questions, reactions to this direction that the Commonwealth's taking?
We're applauding it. We're not represented too well tonight, but a few of us and many others in the church are part of the Metro North node of 350 Mass Action. So they focus on state policy to accelerate environmental progress. And so many of us have met with representatives and state senators and representatives and written letters, and in order to raise the bar, but also to promote policies that'll make it easier for institutions and individuals to actually meet the higher bar. And now we have that. Now we have some hope that the federal government will join us. But for a few years there, it was the only game in town was what we could do at the state level. So there's been quite a bit of energy on that. But within our congregation, we have an individual who would have agreed with your terminology that we're not going to use gas in the future to heat homes in a direct way, but he would say that we could get most of the CO2 out of the smokestack and all of the methane out of the wellhead, so that you could have gas as a useful fuel without contributing very much CO2 to the atmosphere. So we have that perspective in our congregation. Yep. And we have a lot of us who, in the Citizens Climate Lobby members, but others who believe that part of the answer needs to be price signals to every part of society, for consumers and producers, that it's not a free good to pollute the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. So there's energy within the congregation on that. And then we have a couple people, Fritzy's one of them, and another, Sue McPhee is another, who basically have become professionals in terms of helping towns bring solar energy, bring heat smart programs, bring awareness to electrification potential, and to get them to buy into 100% green electricity at the same time. And they've done a lot in that regard, not just for our congregation, but for Winchester and beyond. So we're lucky to have a lot of environmental energy. But when you go back to your earlier slide about most of the progress that's been made over the last 15 years, that's really the building committee. They've just been paying attention. They saw solar energy's potential and seized it. They focused on working with that complicated and old steam system, and they've been seizing the incentive programs like for free LED lighting and things like that. So they really led the church in the building area. In the Green Sanctuary, we focused more actually on getting households to follow the good examples that the building committee has been practicing in our church.
Great, perfect. That's, obviously we work mostly with the church and the governing board there and the treasurer and the building committee, but we always encourage them to share what they've accomplished, with the congregation, and let people know that, yes, churches are very different than houses, but again, most of these principles apply, most of these technologies are available as well, and you can and should do in your home what you see is happening in your house of worship. So I was delighted to see some of the posters and things up. at the church from some of those meetings that you had back in about 2019 before we all went into the COVID lockdown world. So all of that's great work too. All right, well, let's dive into some of the work that you did. And I guess either my agenda is out of order with my slides or my slides are out of order with the agenda, whichever you want to consider it. But so we'll start on these short-term actions. And it's been a few years, I think, a couple of years anyway, since you've had a mass save assessment. I'm sure you had one when you did the lighting upgrade, which I think was 2018 or 2019, and you can do them every 2 years. And the mass save assessment will look at sort of a narrower set of things, but there will be overlap with this report. And obviously its necessity to qualify for the various incentives and rebates and things that the mass save program can give you. So I know I was talking with Chuck. He was talking about looking at a more sophisticated thermostat and heat control system. So I encouraged him to make sure to get that mass save assessment and get some money from mass save to help fund that.
The installation, Jim, sorry to interrupt, of those Wi-Fi thermostats started today.
Oh, great.
Well, go ahead. Just
Exciting.
Woohoo!
Just wanted to say real quickly on the mass save assessment that some people say, well, we had that a few years ago. Why do we do it again? The program changes and the amount of money they give you for different things changes. And sometimes there are new incentives that didn't exist. So it's a really good idea. I know people, and maybe you guys have too, who have quadruple dipped, have had mass save audits 4 times and gotten money each time. So those are good reasons.
do you, Jim, Bill, Phil, do you guys know how to do that? Who to contact? I'll make it happen. I just don't know who to call.
Yeah, we can help you with that.
Yeah,
thank you.
I was gonna say, can we just call the general mass save number and tell them we're a church? Or is there more to
Just
it?
whatever Jim and Bill tell me to do, I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah, you can do that. But I do have another contact for you because I know, Phil, one of the questions you had asked today was about that. I had noted the new mass save program about renovations and major construction that I think some of the bigger projects might apply to. And as I've inquired about that, mass save is a little bit of a Byzantine structure and it's not always easy to get answers. But I did get to a firm that was like, great, we'll come out and do an assessment. And I'm like, well, we're not quite ready for an assessment, just trying to find a little bit more about the program. But I can put, I can put him in touch with you and you can take it from there because they're, hot to trot to do that assessment. So
Jim, are you guys familiar with like particular assessors, or do you generally just tap into Clear Result who do most of the assessments?
Generally, that's one of the other things. The mass save program is a little bit Byzantine about there's the program administrators or the sponsors of the utilities, and there's program administrators, which are like high level, energy firms. And then there's subcontractors to them by region and things. So it's not always easy to find out who is the best one there. We do tend to work with those program administrators, and hopefully that when we talk to them, they pass information down to the actual auditor. But in this case, it was actually one of the program administrators, AECOM, that responded to me. So I'll get you that.
AECOM? Was it AECOM?
AECOM.
Oh, yeah, we use those for the Winchester municipal stuff all the time, and we have.
We've done 2 complete programs with AECOM. I know the guys over there.
Oh,
If we're supposed to contact through AECOM, I'm happy to do that. I know those guys. But so just let me know who to talk to, because the rebates for the Wi-Fi thermostats and maybe the replacing the gas stove, I'm very interested in. If we have to go through the assessment to do it, I'll do it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there is like a little bit of double work, but you know,
Understood.
to get the money.
Hmm.
One of the other, big things there is replacing the AC, the air conditioning unit that services the office, and moving that to a heat pump. That unit is somewhere around 15, 16, 17 years old. And so, it's lived its life. It doesn't owe you anything. And those are the kinds of equipment that the day they die, it will be 100 degrees and in July or August. And you don't want to be in a position where it's like, oh my goodness, we have to get whatever we can get and just get it in here as fast as possible. So being a little proactive to replace that is good. And there are some good rebates for that, but also possibly 0% interest loans, which anytime anybody wants to loan me money at 0% interest, I think that's always a good deal. In the report, I noted a lot of the doors could use some update on the weather stripping. Over time it deteriorates and wears out, and could use replacement or improvement. Mass Save does a lot of that as part of their assessment process. A couple of the doors are old and leaky, and I've got some pictures I'll show here of the music director office door in particular, but also there's a couple of doors in the snowblower room that either could be replaced or it could put some rigid foam insulation on to help that. Definitely have them look at adding insulation above ceilings in some of the rooms. The parlor looks like it's fairly accessible. Not so sure about Mickelson or the RE director's office, music director's office, but they're pretty clever people to figure out how to do things that look really hard. I'll talk a little bit more about the RE wing when we get to the bigger projects. The gas stove in the Metcalf kitchen. In the report, I had an infrared photograph of that, shows it has pilot lights. So it's burning, a tiny bit of gas, but it's doing that 24/7, 365. When a newer piece of equipment will have a electronic ignition and then only burn gas when you're actually using it. So that's worth doing. And that looks like it's a very old piece of equipment. So again, doesn't owe you a whole lot. Hot water tank, that's, after the heating, that's probably the second biggest energy user in most buildings. Got an old 57-gallon tank, which, a 57-gallon tank is large enough for a home of 4 or 5 people taking showers and baths and washing clothes and washing dishes, which obviously at the church you don't do. So you don't need a tank that, again, is keeping that water hot 24/7, 365. And on-demand systems can be much more efficient. And then this major renovation program, which I'll talk a little bit more as we get into the net zero program. Then there are a number of other items that Mass Save probably won't pay for, but it's always worth asking, because they have a version called their custom incentives program, where if you fill out a little bit extra paperwork, they may give you some money. And it's something the auditors typically don't like to talk about, because a lot of these auditors, if they work for for-profit companies, the last thing they want to do is do more work than they absolutely have to, just to be perfectly blunt about, their attitudes and their incentives. But if you push them to, they can certainly help you out with some of that.
Jim?
So list of things there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend a heat pump, hot water heater?
Certainly would be better than a gas hot water heater, but I'm a big fan of on-demand, particularly in houses of worship, where you don't really have constant demand. So, a heat pump hot water heater will still keep 40 gallons, even if, a 40-gallon tank would probably be plenty big for you, but it'll still keep that 40 gallons at 120, 130 degrees, 24/7, 365. that wouldn't really be needed. So I know Mass Save now is big on pushing heat pump hot water heaters. So that may be easier to get through Mass Save. Though, again, even though in our situation as members of a house of worship, on demand may be a better solution. But, you know, we're kind of an odd building class that doesn't fit neatly in either commercial or residential, which is the way Mass Save thinks about the world. So that's why, you know, our environmental stewardship assessments are different than the kind of assessment you'll get from Mass Save.
Jim, could you just say again, it was called a custom incentive program?
Right.
And that's for, what does that cover?
That would be for things like in this list in item 2, like the window inserts and interior storm windows. Mass Save really doesn't like to pay for windows. So they're not part of the standard incentive set, but you may be able to make a case through a custom application, you know, particularly with the kinds of windows you have that I noted, where a lot of them are leaded glass single pane, where you have a lot of air leakage in addition to just the conduction of the heat through them. There's also just cold air gets in through them.
So you recommend that we bring that up?
Yeah.
We say we want to do.
Yep.
Okay.
And, you know, and ask whoever Mass Save sends out or AECOM sends out, say, how do we go about getting filing a custom application for projects like these? Now, some of these things are really inexpensive, like the rigid foam insulation on those doors in the snowblower room. You're talking $40 a sheet, $50 a sheet at your favorite home center store for that. So that's, you know, not a big deal at all. Or the insulation for the pipes on the hot water heater. You know, those are like, again, you buy them in like 8-foot lengths from a hardware store or home center store, and they're maybe $1.50 a foot. So that's not huge money. The window inserts, a typical size window can be like $100 to $150. And you've got a lot of windows. So, you know, if you could get them to give you even 10% of that, you know, that would be, you know, several $100s potentially. Any other question on those?
Just so you know that Joe, our sexton, has made the window inserts in the office and in the RE and the RE minister's, the youth minister's office, Becca Keller's, Becca's office, and that's worked just fine.
Yeah.
So those are the ones that are used a lot with the leaded windows.
Great.
And they're inexpensive, so we wouldn't buy the fancy ass ones. We got a good sexton that can build them. But one more question:
if he's got time to do that, I mean, we often also we've run some work days with some members to get a bunch of people together and build them.
No, please no.
But if you got a section with the skills and the time to do it, go for it.
And he started by replacing the ones that were made by the volunteers. Okay, so now I will say that we had on this Mass Save thing, that all sounds really good, and I'm really interested in these rebates. But the last time we had AECOM in, you were there, Phil.
Yes.
Which 6 months ago, and the only thing he wanted to talk about was replacing an oil-based system with heat pumps, period. That's all that was on his list. Now, that's how he was making his money. Can't blame him. But I couldn't get through that barrier to talk to him about all the other stuff. All right. Yep. And so I'm going to need a contact at Mass Save that isn't AECOM.
Okay.
I think.
Interesting. Good. I'm on.
Right, Phil? You were there, right, Phil?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a similar experience when I started talking about heat pumps at St. Dunstan's because our propane furnaces are about 20 years old. So again, reaching sort of the end of their expected life. And so my first call was about, we're probably going to replace those in the next couple of years. And their next question was, well, what do you heat the rest of your building with? And the minute I said electric baseboard, the only thing I want to talk about is doing the entire building. Okay, fine. I'll take the proposal for that, but I'm not in any rush to replace, because again, we have solar, so that offsets, a lot of our electric stuff. And it's like, if you make it worth my while, we'll do it. And I think too, I didn't mention that before, but I would expect in the next couple of years that there will be new programs, whether it's through Mass Save or through the Mass Clean Energy Center or the Department of Energy Resources or whoever. I suspect the state will come up with additional incentives for some of these major projects. I think they're going to have to do that to achieve these goals. So, it may seem kind of counterintuitive because we know the climate emergency is very urgent, but I'm willing to wait a little bit, to see what additional incentives come up in the next couple of years to then be able to move quickly on doing some of these bigger projects.
I've also had the experience that depending on what auditor shows up at your house, they have a kind of a wide range of understanding and opinions about some of these things. So it is, I think it's helpful to be well educated yourself and be able to ask really specific questions and direct the person, because they may not even be as educated as you are.
Yeah. And forget it when it comes to houses of worship, because they're used to either going into houses or into stores or into schools or office buildings. And literally, when I had an audit probably 8 years ago at St. Dunstan's, the auditor walked in, took one look around and said, "Does anybody live here? Like where do they live?" I'm like, "No, this is a church." He had no idea. So certainly as you go through that process, I'm happy to review whatever recommendations they make and give the Mass IPL opinion on things too, because you're right. You always need to be an educated consumer in any purchase, but this is incredibly important to have at least some knowledge, because a lot of times, and not only is it the individual auditors, knowledge or comfort level with certain things, but as the Mass Save program evolves, they emphasize different things. So right now they are emphasizing heat pumps, so they're pushing all of their auditors to push heat pumps. And about a year or so ago, they were behind on their goals, so they pushed everybody to do insulation, and they were paying 100% of the cost of insulation, not just 70% of the cost, which they've been doing before. So, there's a lot of other factors beyond what is right for your building that influence the recommendations you get. So it is good to, have a good think about what they're recommending and make sure you feel that it's the right thing for your building. Well, let me take a look at a couple of things here. Here is your air conditioning unit that sits outside the office on the parking lot there, which you can see some rust in there. You can see some broken grates and things like that. The best I could determine, it's an old enough model that it doesn't show up in a lot of the databases where you typically can look these things up. So I think it's about a vintage 2004, 2005 item. So it's done its work. It's served you pretty well, I guess. So a good time to start thinking about that replacement. Here is one of the windows with an infrared photograph of it. I believe this was in the Metcalf kitchen. So this is one of the typical windows that is leaded glass, single pane. And you can see there, in the center of the glass is about 47 degrees. I think the day we visited, it was in the 30s outside, and inside it was in the kind of low 60s. It was a Saturday, so the heat wasn't on, but it was still in the 60s. So if the window is 47 degrees, and as you know from the laws of thermodynamics, heat flows to cold, it is just basically pulling the heat, out of the building, to the outside. And so that's where those window inserts put in another layer to slow that down. Here's that music director office door. You can see a crack right in it. And when you look at it from the inside, you can see the light, coming through that crack. Again, fairly easy project to get a nice fiberglass, new fiberglass door. Actually just replaced old wooden doors at St. Dunstan's this winter. And you can even get ones that have those little windows at the top. There's all sorts of great styles available for that. Or certainly put some caulk in that crack, put some weather stripping around, would also help a lot. And then in terms of heat pumps and mini splits, Chuck and I talked about this, and a lot of people, don't like these ductless units, especially the ones that hang on the wall that are in the upper left-hand corner here. And particularly given the style of your building and the age of your building, it would be very incongruous to have something like that, there. However, there are other units like this wall-hung unit that are available that are about the size of one of the steam radiators that you currently have. So that's a possibility. Or here at my house, I just replaced a heating or an air conditioning unit that died on me with a heat pump. And I ended up just putting it through the ducts. So I have the heat pump outside. It goes up to an air handler in my attic, just like my old system did, though it's a new air handler that's compatible with the heat pump. And then the heating and cooling is distributed through the existing ductwork. So then you don't have to worry about any of these, ductless units. And in the office, it appears that there is access to the air handler from the minister's office. We didn't want to disturb the office too much, so we didn't move furniture around to go in there, but there is a door there that I, was open a little bit. I was able to peek in and see that, there's some duct work and things in there. So I think that, the ducted version is potentially useful for you as well. That will be one of the things you'll need to emphasize with the contractor. Contractors don't like ducted systems. They prefer the ductless systems, probably because they get paid more from mass save to do them. The guy did it at my house, and when we were walking around my church with the contractor for that, and I talked about, in the office area where we have the propane furnaces, those are through ducts. And they said, oh, unless we can see the ducts and have access to them to see how well sealed they are, or do some work to seal them, we don't want to reuse ducts. We're going to put in ductless units. But again, I think in that space, they'd be able to see the duct work, and you can probably twist their arm if you prefer not to, put any of these kind of ductless units in the space.
Jim, may I just add that it's possible for you to have a mixture of ducted and ductless delivery
True.
in one system.
True.
I just saw it, for example, at Christchurch United in Lowell, where they've put in a brand new heat pump system to heat and cool the entire building. And there were some places, like in their sanctuary, where ducted delivery made a lot of sense. In fact, they reused the registers that were in the floor from before. And then in other rooms, they had the ductless type. So you can mix and match.
Yep.
Jim, also, what do you need on the outside of the church?
For the heat pump,
Right.
it's this unit right here, underneath where it says ducted. It looks like an air conditioning unit, or this is actually made by American Standard. A lot of the other brands like Mitsubishi, LG are even more compact than this.
And how many would, in our building, how many would we be looking at?
For the office, I'm sure you'd only need one, because the current AC unit is a 2-ton unit, which is a very easy size to do. To get the rest of the building, that's where, as I talk about in the report, either having a mechanical engineer do the analysis or a building science firm do the analysis, because you need to do some really careful calculations. They get pretty complex about the size of the building, the air leakage, the insulation, the heat gain from both equipment inside and from the sun and things like that. And there are software programs that those kinds of organizations use. But for example, here at my house, this unit is a 3-ton unit, which is for my second floor. And prior to that, I had a 5-ton air conditioning only unit, but I had spray foamed insulation, added spray foam insulation in my attic. So I was able to downsize from 5-ton to 3-ton.
Jim and Bill, I'm sorry I didn't actually look at the report. I had it on audio assist, so I was listening to it. So I didn't see if you had a spreadsheet with cost and simple payback listed. Did you do any of that stuff, or that's too far down the road?
Yeah, that's a little further down the road. And again, that's where you get into these kind of more sophisticated calculations that, particularly on these big projects, you definitely want to have the mechanical engineer, building science professional to do it. Things like weather stripping, adding the interior storm windows, things like that. Those are low cost. You don't really need to do calculations on that sort of thing.
Question. So the 1,250 per ton, is that like BTUs? Is that what that means?
Well, a ton, a ton of heating or cooling is 12,000 BTUs.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is because it takes 12,000 BTUs to melt a ton of ice. That's where it comes from. I know these silly technical things that, it's a good question, because those are exactly the kind of things you want to know when the contractor starts throwing around, how many tons you're going to need.
Right. Thank you.
Because contractors tend to want to sell you more tonnage because the equipment's more expensive and has a higher profit margin for them. So, in fact, when I replaced my unit, I talked to 5 different contractors, 3 of whom looked at my old unit, saw it was 5 tons and said, yep, we're going to give you 5 tons. One other contractor kind of looked around in my attic at the duct work, did a couple of back of the envelope calculations and said, gee, your ducts will only deliver 4 tons anyway, so I'll give you a 4-ton unit. And the contractor I went with, a guy named Boucher Energy, did what is the industry best practice, which is called a manual J calculation, which is a protocol from the, I believe it's ASHRAE, American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers.
Yeah.
We've got a detailed protocol of how you do that calculation. And there's, again, software based on that protocol that the contractors should use to give you the right size, because an oversized unit is less efficient. And the unit this replaced was only 13 or 14 years old. So it was a little premature that it died, but that may well have been because if I only needed 3 tons of cooling and it's a 5-ton unit, it's very inefficient. It's going on and off very quickly, and that wears out components.
Yeah.
So
It's
not only is matching the size right better for, again, carbon footprint and energy cost, it'll actually lengthen the life of the equipment.
And by the way, it happens in our Heat Smart program that we had in Winchester and Arlington. That wasn't a requirement of the selection of the contractors, that they use a state-of-the-art process to determine the required size of the units. So
yeah,
that was a disappointment. So I personally went with another provider because the other guys just sort of square foot and move on. Yeah, and err on the side of overcapacity. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's all these old rules of thumb about 500 BTUs per 100 square feet or something like that, that were also based on like 1970s or 1980 eras construction, which didn't have as much insulation as we do now. So yeah, anyone who's using those kind of rules of thumb is pulling numbers out of thin air, basically.
Do you want to get to the big
Yeah.
2 or 3? Because you didn't.
Sure.
Good.
Oh, but the last one here, because this is simple.
That's good.
This is, I would ask Pegasus, I mentioned in here, have Pegasus just check that all of your panels and all of the microinverters are functioning properly. When I looked at the year-by-year production of solar, you can see these first 3 years, good solid 21 to 22,000 kilowatt hours a year. Then all of a sudden it drops to 20, and it stayed in the 20. And I don't know what happened in, and I can't see because I've got something over there, but this year of 18,620. And there's basically 2 reasons that the kilowatt production of solar panels fluctuates. One is shade. If trees grow up over the years and start to put more shade on the panels, that will lower production. Not a problem that you have on your panels. And the second thing is, largely snow. If you have a really heavy snow winter and the panels are covered by snow for a long period of time, like, at my house and even at the church, February was pretty snowy, so it was not a good production month. But, I look at 2014, 2015, that was that horrible winter. We had like 8 feet of snow and you had pretty solid production. But it's never recovered. So I would just have them check on that. It should be a simple matter. They can probably dig into more detail than you have access to on the online monitor that you have. They can probably dig into that and look panel by panel, inverter by inverter, and just give that a check to see if there's anything that isn't working right. Because these panels should still be producing consistently 21,000, very high 20,000s to 21,000 a year. So that should be an easy one to get an answer on. Anyway, so let's talk about the big projects, what I call part of your net zero plan. And project number 1 will be replacing that steam heating system. Steam is inherently inefficient because you're always heating water to 212 degrees when, like this month, when it's 50 degrees out, you need a little bit of heat, but you don't need to heat water to 212 to get the amount of heat that you need. And a hot water system, you can vary that temperature. But steam systems, are quite complex. There's a lot of moving parts. You got to blow them down. You got to pay attention to the steam traps. All of that sort of stuff requires regular maintenance. And if it's not maintained well, it very quickly loses efficiency. And the boiler is about 20 years old, circa about 2000. They typically have a expected useful life of 30 years. Which is not to say it will die when it turns 30. It might go to 40. And we certainly, at Mass IPL, when we do these, we see equipment that is 40 and 50 years old. But it certainly doesn't get any more efficient as it gets old. So, the moral of the story here is this is a good time to start thinking about this replacement. No huge rush to do that. So you have time to do some of the investigation, to see if the state comes up with more incentives, to engage a building science professional or mechanical engineer to help you think through this exact specifications of what you'd be looking for and how heat pumps will or won't work in the church.
Jim, just a quick point of reference. At my church in Andover, our steam boiler has just failed after 19 years. It was brand new 19 years ago.
Wow.
And a couple of the consultants that looked at it said, well, 19 years, that's not too surprising. It's not, you don't get a warranty claim on that. So I'm not saying that it's going to happen within a year, but it would not be surprising if your boiler had a major problem within a year.
Interesting. Yeah, it's one of these things you never know with this equipment when it's going to go. But obviously, if you do look at replacing this with heat pumps, that's a major job that will require a lot of planning and analysis and fundraising. But again, based on that statement in the Baker administration's Decarbonization Roadmap, they're really going to try to get buildings off of any sort of fossil fuel that they can. Now, I did note in the report, and again, this is where that building science analysis will be helpful. One of the ways that steam works really well for houses of worship is that it is good at heating up really big spaces really fast because it carries so much, steam carries so much heat, both latent and specific if you want to get into the thermodynamics of it, which I won't drag you into right now. And in your sanctuary, because you have those beautiful, large, but I'm sure very leaky stained glass windows, it may be hard with heat pumps to get enough heat in there to do that. So you may need to keep that part of the building on some kind of fossil fuel system. Probably can at least go down from steam to a hot water system, so you'd be able to vary the temperature based on how cold it is outside. But again, one of those elements important to analyze and get the data on as you think about planning that, as well as having the building science expert. They may have some great solutions on how to improve the heat retention in that sanctuary as well.
Would it be, Jim, would it be worth exploring geothermal?
I would love to see you explore geothermal. It would make it more feasible because a geothermal system is inherently more efficient than an air source heat pump system because the ground temperature is consistent year round, versus with an air source heat pump they become less efficient as the temperature drops into the 20s or the teens. And while the newest generation of cold climate heat pumps, will operate down to zero. I was actually watching a webinar from Dakin a couple of weeks ago, where they were doing a demonstration of one of their pieces of equipment that was, operating at -13 and putting out, nice toasty warm air. It's that combination of, outdoor temperature and the thermal performance of the building that determines, how many BTUs you need and, how much electricity is needed to produce those BTUs. And in an air source heat pump, they will typically go up to about, it's called the coefficient of performance, which is how many BTUs of output you get for each BTU of input. And an air source heat pump, at best goes to about 3.5 to 4. But again, as the temperature drops, it goes down to 2, maybe under 2. So it's less efficient. But geothermal, because the ground is always a constant 50-ish degrees temperature, they are typically a constant 4 to 4.5 coefficient of performance. More efficient, a little bit more expensive, obviously, because you have to drill the wells for them. But again, that can be part of the analysis that you do here.
Sue, you should know I'm working on an active investigation of geothermal for that very reason. Exploring a whole bunch of things, but you're right, you can't assume that heat pumps are just the air source ones. The most efficient ones are the geothermal. Yep. We can talk more about that, but I'm working on that.
Yeah. And Chuck, I had shared with you that This Old House video, I think.
I know, I saw it. I saw it. They're getting a little better at drilling the wells, but we got to be smarter than that. Yeah. And I'm working with some other people as well, trying to figure it out, but it's going to take time. Yeah. So let's hope you're wrong, Bill. We're going to need the 10 years of that boiler life to figure this puppy out.
Exactly. Well, and that's where even at St. Dunstan's, while my propane furnaces are 20 years old, they're still operating at 93% efficiency. So again, I'm hoping that that there will be some better incentives in the next couple of years, because they have off the top of their head, when the contractor was scoping out the building, and I have not gotten a proposal yet, but he said, oh yeah, this is $100,000 to $120,000 project to do this whole building. So I'm hoping there's some really good incentives down the road, and I'm not in a huge hurry.
And it does certainly seem like what you've talked about in terms of the various spaces in the church, and Chuck, I know you're all over this, is that ground source might work in certain spots and then air source in others.
Yeah, most of the rooms are small enough. And again, with the window inserts, there are certain things you can do to improve the heat retention, that a heat pump will work just fine. It's really just the sanctuary. Maybe Metcalf Hall, but even there, I think that's doable. But it's really the sanctuary, because of those big windows and the fact there's like no insulation in the roof, and very hard to get any insulation into that roof, where I think that's going to be a challenging space to do. So that's one. The other big one was a deep energy retrofit of the religious education wing. Here I have a picture of one of the windows in one of the classrooms, single pane, these aluminum frames, and then the infrared picture on the right there that shows that those aluminum frames, aluminum being a great conductor of heat, at 40 degrees. So again, if you're trying to heat that room to 65 or 68, those aluminum frames and those windows are just sucking that heat, right out of that room. And then the picture on the right here, up on the 3rd floor in one of the classrooms, there is a hatch that Chuck helped us, open up so we could get up there. And you can see there's basically no insulation. Couple of inches of fiberglass with this foil kind of wrap around it. As we looked around, it's old. It probably wasn't installed very well to start with because this was built in the 1950s, and in the 1950s, who cared? Energy was cheap. But obviously a lot of room up there to add insulation as well. But when I say a deep energy retrofit, it would involve potentially a couple of things. And this is, again, we're a building science firm, and I mentioned a couple in the report, would help do this analysis, where you would do that insulation in the roof that I just showed you, but you would also add exterior insulation. And I think, Chuck, I sent you another This Old House video or two, where a couple of years ago, they did a house in Jamestown, Rhode Island, and did a pretty deep retrofit and then added onto there. And they showed putting this insulation on the exterior of the building. The good thing about that is it's much less disruptive. You're not opening up walls on the inside and tearing out plaster and things like that. But also, it's a really, really effective strategy to prevent what's called thermal bridging, where not so much in this building, but in a building that has typical wood studs. Those wood studs are pretty good conductors of cold. And while you may have fiberglass or cellulose, in the wall itself that has a good insulation value, those studs are still conducting that heat, out of the building more effectively. You have exterior insulation, stops all of that. And then it'll be pretty easy
Jim,
to apply and then refinish it. Yeah.
Jim, if you send me those other links, I missed it. If you could send those again, I would like to see that on the exterior insulation stuff, because I need to picture better how you do that. So thank you for sending those again.
Yeah, absolutely. Will do. And then, of course, new windows. You'd want to go with nice double or even triple pane windows. Probably decrease the size somewhat too, as you did in the addition at the end of the wing, where I think the elevator is, and there's a classroom up there, and there's smaller windows, double pane windows. And again, in the report, I have an IR photo that shows much less heat loss, through those kinds of windows. And while you're doing all of that, or somewhere in this project 1 and 2 world, is to consider taking the RE wing off the steam heating system entirely and having its own heat pump system, which would allow you much better control of heat in that part of the building. And since that is used by the preschool, and so it's used 40 or more hours a week, there's a lot of energy consumption there, and the better control you can have over that, the better. And it, because the usage there is so different than the rest of the building, it also makes sense to have, systems that are somewhat more independent. So you, again, have that opportunity to control them a bit more.
Wow. You're covering a lot. This is wonderful.
Yeah. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and I'm trying not to be, too technical and use too much jargon. So, but if there's any terms you don't understand, please do ask.
I build this as an hour-long meeting. Obviously, we've stretched the timeline for some people. Are there questions that haven't been asked? We do have some comments in the chat room. I don't know how I get those to you. Is there a trick to? Oh, you could probably open that.
me
but
see.
they're,
Yeah, okay, yep.
it's mostly appreciation. In the question that Fritzie asked about, did we have a spreadsheet on the costs and payback for each of these items? And the answer there was no. But it's mostly
Mhm.
appreciation.
Yep.
And I guess the third thing I thought you might have on here, you had the big project with reconsidering steam heat, either going to the hot water or heat pump approach. Then you had the building treating the RE building as a whole, as a separate building, and really tightening it up, and then letting electricity heat pump heat it. But the third one I wondered about is the looking at our solar capacity and when to increase it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that's a big priority for you, because again, where I'm looking at this, what is your path to net zero?
Right,
The vast majority of your carbon footprint is that steam heating system.
right.
So, should you spend another, $50,000+ replacing and upgrading your solar panels, or should you put that $50,000 toward the replacement of the boiler? And if you look at it sort of like cost per ton of carbon reduction, the boiler replacement will have a bigger payback.
I hear you. That's interesting. Because
And I'm assuming that financial resources are limited.
yeah,
If they're not,
that's always the
by all
assumption.
means, do it all at once. But that's a pretty rare occurrence in houses of worship.
Jim, you also in the report talk about taking resources, taking money we save
Mhm.
from energy by saving energy and using that to help support, the long-term goals. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Because of course, the first, instinct of any treasurer when they save money is to, drop that to the bottom line, i.e. in our parlance, like, woohoo, stewardship doesn't need to raise as much money because we're saving all this money. And in this case, because there is always more to do in lowering your energy use, we recommend that you set up, we call it an energy efficiency budget line. And so when you have those savings, instead of lowering the expenses, those go into this energy efficiency budget line. And what we provided an example in there. You basically look at, if you do nothing, what will your energy expenses likely be over the next 3, 4, 5 years? And then as you do some of these projects, like some of those smaller projects I talked about, they'd save you a few hundred, maybe into the low $1,000 range on some of those things. Use that money to fund the energy efficiency budget line. The total of the energy cost and energy efficiency budget line is the same as that energy cost line would be if you did nothing. But now, when you save a few hundred, a couple $1,000s, now you've got money to invest in other things, and you lower the energy cost more, boost the energy efficiency budget line further, or if you don't have expenses in that year, set up a reserve fund on the side that money goes into, particularly for these things like a boiler replacement or the RE wing work that would be, probably several years off. This is a way to save up for that and at least have some money in the bank to dedicate to that. And I think it demonstrates to the congregation, very responsible fiscal management, that you're aware these expenses are on the horizon, and rather than simply waiting till the bill comes due and asking people to get out their checkbooks, you're doing what you can to prepare for those kinds of projects. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? They're not really going to disappear. I think they're true believers in their work and in the mission. So if we have other questions,
Absolutely.
we can probably get back to them. We're
Yep.
lucky to have such a willing providers of this analysis.
Yeah, I actually have a thought. I don't know if it's exactly a question, but yes, thank you so much, Jim and Bill, for coming tonight. I know the Unitarian Universalist Association has consultants that help congregations work through a wide variety of issues and questions. And so I'm wondering if, we were to really sit down with this and try to brainstorm or create a game plan, if there are people who are sort of neutral, informed people that can help do that. Do you do that? Is that something that Interfaith Power and Light has done with churches to help them through the process, or how does that?
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to help in any way we can. We'd be happy to come present, at coffee hour on a Sunday, or even preach, to help set that up. Where sort of our expertise ends, like I saw a number of questions about, and we had a question before about, so what are the, cost estimates for these kinds of things? That's where we don't have the skills and expertise to do that. And that's where either a mechanical engineer or a building science company, again, which I mentioned in the report, would be a firm you would hire and pay. So they are working for you, as opposed to a contractor who is really working for himself and is going to make recommendations that make him or her the most money. The building science and mechanical engineers are going to be trying to find out what's the best solution for your building. And they have that technical expertise. They have that energy modeling software, and will really be able to do the detailed analysis necessary to figure out the best path.
Do you find that most churches do that?
More and more are, at our recommendation, because we often and our predecessor, the founder, Tom Nutt Powell, who's sort of stepping back as he's reaching that age where he wants to travel and see his grandchildren, do all that fun stuff. But this was a big crusade of his, because most of the time, the easy thing to do is call up the contractor, say, hey, our boiler died, come tell us what to do. The contractor comes in and looks at the boiler and says, like they did at my house, oh, it's 5 tons. I'll sell you a new 5-ton unit, period. And that's usually not the best solution. And that's where a mechanical engineer is going to look at that, do the energy modeling, understand, again, this analysis we've done of, here are the areas of the building that are used the most, here's the areas that aren't used that much, and figure out, how can you create the right zones, what is the right equipment to use. And what we see in many churches that we've worked with over the years, instead of having a single large commercial boiler as you have, they will have 2 or maybe even 3 smaller residential scale boilers or furnaces. So that, typical suburban church, most of the week, the only spaces used are the offices. So why fire up that big honking boiler if like 15 or 20% of your building is being used? So that's where, particularly the Nori and Ciani Engineering, whom we've worked with and is on our advisory board. That's one of his favorite strategies, and he's worked with a lot of churches to take that, take that approach.
Yeah. Jim, may I chime in for a minute
Absolutely.
along this line? One thing about going to heating contractors for the next step is that they tend to know what they know well. So if you ask them for a heating system, whatever it is they do, whether it's steam, whether it's air conditioning, what have you, and whatever brands they carry, that's what they will propose to you. And that's fine. I totally understand that. But that's not taking the broad view that you really need when you want to consider your options. When you go to essentially a consulting engineer like Nori and Ciani, they're familiar with lots of different kinds of systems, and they can tell you what the trade-offs are between them. And in fact, for not a whole lot of money, they can go through your building and tell you what a few reasonable options are for that building and give you approximate ideas that are probably plus minus 20% of what that'll cost and what benefit you'll get from it. A church in Littleton, I believe it's the UU Church in Littleton, just did that and got a nice report. And then they got to sit down and decide where they wanted to go what direction they wanted to take and how important was getting to net zero and all that. We're about to do the same process at my church. Again, because the congregation is going to want to know just exactly that. Well, what about geothermal heat pumps? What about air source heat pumps? How much will they cost for this building? How much cost difference is there? When will that pay back? That requires a good deal of engineering expertise and the ability to apply their tools to a specific building situation. So we'd strongly recommend that approach.
Do
And
you
are
have
we
a
looking-
list of people that you have that like referral? Do you have a referral list?
Yes,
You do. Okay.
we included that.
Good. And are we looking for one organization, or are we looking for someone who specializes in heating systems, somebody who specializes in insulation? Is it multiple?
No, I think it's
organizations?
one. I think it's a mechanical engineer that specializes in HVAC systems. And you can ask for references and what sort of buildings they've worked on and all that sort of thing to decide what's good. The other thing I would say about it is that what you get from this is not a detailed design. You get estimates, and the detailed design, as you might imagine, is something once you decide the approach you want, then that's the next step. However, in terms of what's it going to take to do a big job like this, and you're unlikely going to need to spend a good deal of money for a transformation system, it's going to take a while to decide what you're going to do and then to raise the money to do it. So doing the next step of getting these engineering type estimates in puts you in a position to be able to do the next. Otherwise, you're just, talking a little too much in generalities. When somebody says, how much money do you want to raise in this capital campaign? If you say, well, I really don't have a clue, it doesn't go over well.
Yeah, we're like, well, maybe 500,000, maybe $1 million, somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there, yeah.
One other thing you mentioned that we haven't talked about, this is the idea of a bulk purchase. Is this something we've looked into, Chuck, as far as you know, in the past? From this National Grid has a bulk purchase that's available for
That's
any,
through,
any nonprofit
Bulk,
organization
bulk purchase of what? What are you looking for?
of gas.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, this is through an organization.
I've never looked at that. No.
yeah, just curious.
Yeah.
But you think that's something that typically yields a 10 or 15% savings, you're saying?
Yeah.
Who do you bulk it up with?
It's through an organization called Power Options, which buys energy on behalf of all nonprofits, any nonprofit in the state that wants to join them.
Yeah, the town has used them, Chuck, and Susan McPhee has worked with them. So she might be able to give us a little inside info.
Yeah.
Is there somebody that wants to help with that? I'm a little busy with the others mechanical stuff I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask about it.
Yeah.
I can find out.
When I follow up, I will send you the name of our contact there.
Thank you, Jim.
Great.
Yeah.
It won't hurt, it won't help our carbon footprint, but it would help our budget.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. If you
Right.
did go with that and you saved 10 or 15% of your gas bill,
That
that-
starts our energy revolving fund.
exactly. That's a good start to it. It's what, $1,800 a year that you can put into that energy efficiency fund. Why not?
Saving money is always good,
Exactly.
whatever you do with it.
Yeah. Well, and if you spend it rather than giving it to National Grid, if you spend it on something that's going to further lower your energy use over time,
Yeah.
eventually that's, it's all good. That's that virtuous cycle we try to set up with that idea.
Right. Any other thoughts or questions before we say thank you and good night? Any?
There was one of the chat questions came in about, do we compare different houses of worship and energy usage? And yes, we do.
Yeah.
And in the report, I made a note of that.
Yes.
In the building industry, there is a metric called the energy use intensity, which is the number of thousands of BTUs, British thermal units, per square foot per year that a building uses. The Energy Information Administration publishes data about that by dozens of different building types. And for religious buildings in the Northeast, their number comes out to 50,000 BTUs per square foot per year, 50 kBTU per square foot per year. And your building is 52.9, which I was quite frankly very surprised given the age of the building, again, considering some of the lack of insulation in areas.
Thank you, Chuck, and the building committee.
Yeah, no,
Thank you, Chuck.
it's great that you're able to hit that kind of number, given what you're dealing with, and the number of hours of use, particularly with the preschool. That's darn good considering what you're working with. So, but again, it shows the power of just paying attention to these things. That again.
Speaking of, I liked your reminder that darn, we have several fridges and freezers sitting there on full blast with nothing in them. So that's a good thing to unplug.
Yeah.
That's something when we do the schools. I mean, that's one of the things I've done around town is, follow the schools at vacation weeks and summer break to just remind people to power down. We call it power down. That would be a good routine to get into.
Don't be so sure, Fritzy, those freezers and refrigerators are not being used. Okay, so I'm exploring each one.
Yep.
You got to look at, I mean, can you imagine trying to put a bathroom in the lobby without talking to all the people that walk through the lobby? You can't change a refrigerator without talking to all the people that use it. And you'd be surprised how much use there is for those. Okay.
Still during the pandemic, that's awesome.
But I'm going to be there. There is going to be a bunch of stuff happening in that area. But in terms of the carbon footprint for the building, refrigerators are a minor
Yeah.
source, okay?
Right.
It's not gonna buy us that much, although everything we do needs to be an improvement.
And, you know,
But it's on my list. That one's being actively worked on.
yeah, and you're fortunate. Your refrigerators and freezers are relatively new. You know, we've seen members that have like 40-year-old fridges that, you know, somebody was remodeling their kitchen and gave it to the church, and it's just a complete energy hog. And you're not in that situation. So yeah, Chuck, you're right. You can save a little bit, but again, you've got some big things that are going to require a lot of time and effort. So, that's where I think you can see the biggest payback.
Well, I think we've given everybody a chance, and thank you so much. This has been terrific.
Right.
And
Yes, thank you.
we've
Well,
got,
Fascinating,
Yeah. Well, and
important information.
yeah, and
Enjoyed working with you guys.
yeah, Chuck, it was great working with you. I appreciate, all the answers to all the questions I pestered you with over the weeks there. And
We added the one of those, the main uncontrolled zones. We put a new controller in 2
nice,
weeks ago.
great.
And so we have now 5 of the 7 zones controlled. The other ones we're going to deal with the individual radiators, and the smart thermostat project started today.
Nice.
So we're still
Great
working
stuff.
on moving towards 2035
Yep.
with steam. Maybe there's an award for that.
Hey, speaking of awards, I would love to work with you guys to submit you to National IPL for their Cool Congregations Award. Because I think it's a great story of just the many different ways you've been looking at energy and the results you've achieved. I think you got a winner there. So we can talk about that. I think the
Thank you.
deadline is in December each year, something like that. But
Well, pick somebody, not me, to work with on that. I think that's a great idea.
well, and now with this report, it's basically you're just going to pull some data and some information out of this report and reformat it for the competition application form. So that would be easy. We can
Well,
definitely.
thank you. That's exciting. That
Yeah.
sounds
And-
interesting.
Yeah. And I think like the winners get like $1,000 or something. So another $1,000 to go into your energy efficiency fund.
we're recovering from being runner-up in another category, in the community impact, based on our 31 households that signed up for 100% green electricity, the campaign that
Yeah.
achieved that.
Yeah.
We just
Is
so we-
that
we
sort of
have
like
some
a
experience.
best attitude in a beauty pageant?
Yeah, so no, it's
Yes,
no,
right.
Chuck, it's worse than that. It's second prize in personality improvement.
All right, there you go.
Let's get you for the like renewable role model or something. But hey,
That sounds good.
we are here. I'm sure there'll be more questions as you go forward on this. Please reach out anytime. We're more than happy to lend you any expertise that we have and any guidance we can give you on helping you continue on this path to net zero.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to all of you who showed up tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, Fritzy.
All set. All right.